This is a review of the Borderlands movie from someone who's actually a Borderlands fan and has actually played the Borderlands games. Who the hell am I, and why should you care, you might be asking? Well, I suspect most of the people involved in making this movie and some of the other high profile reviewers out there are not exactly Borderlands fans. My Borderlands credentials are ironclad. I've defeated each of the Borderlands games a minimum of 2 times. I've logged well over 1,000 hours into the Borderlands universe. I know Borderlands. I'm going to get this out of the way immediately. Is the Borderlands movie good? No, it's not, but it's also not 8% tomato meter worthy. Borderlands is an acceptable and unremarkable action sci-fi movie. More than anything else, it's a frustrating and disappointing experience because of what could have been. The seeds of a good movie were there, but this is about far more than reshoots and bad casting and behind-the-scenes drama. It's obvious that people at the top didn't know or didn't care how to handle Borderlands. Number one, they tried to cram two 25-plus hour video game stories into a single sub-2-hour movie. A lot of people are going to point to the casting and bad humor as the major issues here, but that's not really the ultimate primary problem. The major problem with the Borderlands movie is they tried to squeeze in story elements from both Borderlands 1 and 2, which continuity-wise makes zero sense. Borderlands 2 is set 5 years after the events of the first game, and as I'm about to get into, both stories don't and can't work when shoved together like that. Number two, they got Borderlands 1 and the world of Pandora completely wrong. Cramming two long game stories into one movie is hard enough, but Borderlands makes this harder because Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2, the games, are totally completely different experience. The tone of Borderlands 1 is lonely, sad, desperate. The entire planet of Pandora is there to kill you. The residents lose their sanity. The humor in the game is dark, best evidenced by the game-long tape recordings of Tannis, who arrives a plucky, brilliant scientist, but over time loses her mind as her team is killed in horrible ways, and everyone else on Pandora loses their mind trying to find the vault while being exposed to the horrors of the planet and just trying to survive. The humor in the Borderlands 1 game is mostly dark. You encounter friendly characters like blind homesteader TK Baja, who lost his sight due to a skag attack. And spoiler alert, he, like most everyone else you meet on Pandora, eventually dies. Dr. Zed, one of the first NPCs you encounter, basically has become a mad scientist butcher type. The jokes made by and because of these characters are dark and sad. The character of Claptrap himself is basically used to balance the desperation and sadness that permeates Pandora. His optimism is a stark contrast from the rest of the world. But that is ultimately the tone of Borderlands 1. Dark, sad, dour. Pandora really is a tourist trap. People are lured there by the promise of the vault and riches and fame, but the reality is much different. It consumes everyone who goes there, either literally by being killed, or it turns them into different people by forcing them to kill and scavenge to survive, like the bandits and the psychos, or they profit off of those visitors and their dreams of finding the vault. People like Marcus and Zed. Pandora, ultimately, is a barren wasteland where almost everyone and everything is out to get you. Number three, Borderlands 2 completely changes gears. I'm sure for marketing, feedback, sales purposes, Borderlands 2 is completely different tonally than Borderlands 1. In an effort to make the game look and feel different, the environments are much more varied, with different biomes, environments, and set pieces, a more colorful and visually diverse experience. The game also moves from a dark sense of humor to a more silly and absurd direction. While I don't love that tone shift, I do understand why they did it, and the Borderlands 2 gameplay experience is still fantastic, and the story great in its own new style. These things do have to happen in commercial enterprises like video games or movies where sales are the driving force for the item being created. The point is, however, they were able to shift tones but still make it work in the game's story, and that's the important distinction. Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2 were two completely different games and experiences. The movie tries to tell the story of Borderlands 1 with the tone of Borderlands 2, really arguably the tone of Borderlands 3, but I won't even go down that road. And for fans of the series, it throws your brain into lockdown. Also, the story of Borderlands 1 simply just doesn't work as well with that lighter tone. Number 4. They butchered the plot and the characters of both games. Let's start with Borderlands 1, and I'm going to summarize this as best as I can. I'm going to miss a couple of things along the way, but the basic plot of Borderlands 1 is that you, the player, are a vault hunter lured to Pandora by promises of riches of the mythical vault. Once there, you discover how horrible Pandora really is. You are guided by a mysterious presence known as Angel, who is completely ignored in the movie, by the way. She helps you find the people and places you need to discover to eventually open the vault. Over the course of the game, you learn that the vault can only be opened every 200 years, another important detail missing from the movie. Coincidentally, your timing is such that you're approaching that 200-year window. The power corporations like Atlas and Dahl are very interested in the vault and are looking for it as well, and they become much more interested when it becomes clear you're close to finding it. And yes, it is because they want to use the alien technology for nefarious purposes. The vault does open, Atlas is denied by the Guardian inside, and then the vault closes, theoretically not to open again for another 200 years. So you're victorious for finding the vault and keeping its contents hidden from the corporations that would use it for ungainly purposes. At the end of the game, you see that Angel's transmissions are being broadcast from a competing corporation satellite, Hyperion, which sets up the plot for Borderlands 2. So, 5 years after the events of the first game, Borderlands 2 happens. The settlement of Sanctuary is established, but it's much smaller than the movie shows and is still a horrible, desolate setup on a still uninhabitable planet. The movie shows Sanctuary, for some reason, as a bustling place where Burning Man rejects are wandering around shopping, partying, and having a good time. In Borderlands 2, characters like Roland and Lilith become NPCs, and so are far more crucial to the story. And this is where the Firehawk storyline comes into play for Lilith, as it's introduced that there are a certain amount of sirens in the galaxy, women with special powers tied to the Iridian aliens, and Lilith is one of those sirens. Also in Borderlands 2, Roland and Tina meet, with Roland becoming somewhat of a father figure for her, which will become a bigger deal later on. The major plot revolves around Handsome Jack, who's the head of the Hyperion Corporation, trying to force his way into the vault once again by speeding up that 200-year opening window. He's resisted by Roland's Crimson Raiders, and is eventually discovered that Angel is actually Jack's daughter, who is also a siren and is being held captive and used by Jack to help him open the vault. The Angel plotline is absolutely 1000% essential to both games, and it's completely ignored in the movie, which tries to squish together elements of both Borderlands 1 and 2 into one plotline, and Angel is critical to both of those stories. Alright, on to the characters, and I will avoid talking casting for now, but how the characters themselves are portrayed in the games versus the movie. Roland in the games is a more serious military type with a conscience, not a mercenary joke machine. Lilith is a mysterious femme fatale, not a jaded cynic with abandonment issues. It was never implied or stated that Lilith was born on Pandora, nor was she abandoned by her mother. There's no pre-established history with Tannis or Moxie. Now, Lilith's personality does change in the games as her powers are unlocked throughout the series, and it becomes apparent that she'll have far more responsibilities and people counting on her, but that happens gradually over time. This, kids, is called an arc. Tiny Tina was orphaned on Pandora, as her parents were killed, helping shape her stunted maturity and penchant for violence. She did not even appear in Borderlands 1, and story timeline-wise, she would have been 8 during those events. Tina was also not a lab creation or a clone or the daughter of a megacorporation head, and speaking of said megacorporation head Atlas, that was a character created specifically for the movie. Tannis, as previously mentioned, arrives on Pandora, a capable and talented scientist, but slowly loses her mind after witnessing horrific violence and ending up alone. What Lilith and Tina definitely were not were some sort of key to opening the vault, at least in the first game. Without going too deep into the Borderlands story, angel siren powers were used to hasten the opening of the vault in Borderlands 2 by Handsome Jack, and Jack does eventually try to use Lilith for the same purpose, but that's a long walk and a big difference. For a deep cut for the fans, I'm going to make special mention of General Knox here. Knox in the movie is the female helmetless officer of the Crimson Lance, and this is another example of changing a character for no good reason and wasting that character at the same time. In the games, General Knox is the main character of one of the DLCs that started a tonal shift between Borderlands 1 and 2 to a more over-the-top and silly tone. The DLC featuring Knox is very funny, and the dour and depressed Knox's narration and comments drive the entire story. To throw this character in as a generic heavy is an example of unnecessary plot changing and a huge wasted opportunity, as General Knox was a great character that could have had potential. It's also important to remember that he was not in Borderlands 1 or Borderlands 2 directly, so Knox is a character that only serious fans of the games would ultimately care about, and the usage here is beyond baffling. Number 5. Casting. Primarily of the main characters was all very wrong. This is the point that most everyone, including me, seems to agree on, so here we go, kids. The casting in this movie makes absolutely no sense. In the first Borderlands game, Lilith is a 25-year-old vixen-type character showing off her midriff and chest, posing seductively. She's deceptively deadly. Nothing super original, your basic femme fatale. So in addition to the obvious age difference that a Cate Blanchett visually gives off, Lilith comes off as way more wise, mature, and older beyond her years, which does make sense as the story will go on towards the end of Borderlands 2, but here is a horrible miscast. I actually think Cate did a pretty decent job given the circumstances, but it was still a very odd choice. Jamie Lee Curtis's Tannis is the one that personally bothers me the most. I know most people care about Kevin Hart as Roland, which we'll get to, but Jamie Lee Curtis playing a 30 to 35-year-old socially awkward, if not completely demented woman was the worst of the casting in my eyes. Her acting also came off like someone told her to just act like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. That's what she went with. Again, this granny from Activia commercials also has to show off her cleavage in this movie as well. I already talked a little bit about Tiny Tina. I think Ariana Greenblatt more or less played the role just fine. Tina's acting isn't the problem. Her entire character is. Though again, we should point out that she should be between the age of 8 and 13, barely pubescent. Her backstory, however, is the primary issue. And now on to Roland, played by Kevin Hart, a short physical comedian trying to play a more or less surly, straight-laced soldier. A very weird choice, obviously. Honestly, it bothered me less than I thought it would, but it could have been so much better with a better actor and dialogue that were more true to the character. And that brings us to Jack Black as Claptrap. I think he did more or less fine, but I feel there was no good reason to not simply have the video game voice actor do the role, and this is clearly a case of the movie studio going for name recognition. I have no idea how much the research said that having Jack Black voice act the robot would add to the bottom line, but I'm seriously skeptical of whatever those numbers were. Number 6. So why did they do it like this? Why were some of these changes made? There's a couple of points I do have theories on, one of them being the inclusion of Tiny Tina. The Tiny Tina Wonderlands video game came out in 2022, which is basically a Borderlands sequel of sorts. The Borderlands movie finished filming in 2021, so I believe it was intended to come out at the same time and be a cross-promotion, and that's why the decision to make Tina a major part of the movie was there. However, due to the movie needing so much reshooting and other work, it didn't end up lining up that way. The other major decision that I've got a theory on is the tone of the movie. I feel the studio heads wanted a more feel-good movie than something more true to the Borderlands video games would have provided. I know originally this was intended to be R-rated. Somewhere along the line, I think they decided they wanted a more family-friendly Guardians of the Galaxy type of experience, try to appeal to a wider audience. Borderlands 1 and 2 as games are not exactly happy, feel-good titles. They've got a lot of bleak depression, dark humor, sadness, violence, gore. Yes, the heroes are victorious, but the road there is long and not easy. However, some of the other decisions they made, I can't even really hazard a guess. Scooter not being included is very strange. His absence is striking. He seems like a no-brainer. Krieg over Brick was also a strange choice. The butchering of the Nox characters, I already talked about, makes no sense. And then the weird, strange combination of Crom and Sledge into one character who actually doesn't really seem to do anything in the movie until the end is also very odd. I'm sure in the original cut or story that character had more to do, but as was presented, it just comes off as another missed opportunity that doesn't make any sense. So when it comes down to the big things, I'm sure perceived earning potential was the driving force, and for the little things, I believe it came down to people who didn't really care or know, or both, anything really, about the source material they were working with. Number 7. What would you have done, Mr. Know-It-All, LAG? Well, there are 3 ways that I think they could have gone about making this first Borderlands movie. The first would have simply been to tell the Borderlands 1 story. The script practically writes itself. Have the introduction be Marcus with the 4 original main characters, roll in Lilith, Brick, and Mordecai being dropped off in Firestone, introduce the Angel character and Claptrap, and go from there. Set up the bleak desolation of Pandora, the insanity of the surviving locals, the savagery of the bandits. A scene like the attack on Firestone would have been great and helped establish an emotional connection. Have the characters find Tannis's echo journals throughout the game for both exposition about the vault and insight into the Tannis character as well as she descends into madness. Eventually, you have the characters get to the vault, open it up, defeat the Guardian, and set up a possible sequel with a post-credit scene of the Angel broadcasts coming from the Hyperion satellite. So basically, the story of Borderlands 1 as written. It would have been a more dark, serious movie, more of a Mad Max style than a Guardians of the Galaxy vibe. The second choice, if you wanted to go for that Guardians of the Galaxy vibe, would have basically been to skip Borderlands 1 entirely and tell the Borderlands 2 story. You could intro how Vault Hunters had opened the vault recently, and that now Handsome Jack was trying to force it open again. Again, you introduce the Angel character and set up Handsome Jack as the primary villain, and you could still use the original Vault Hunters as the main characters because really, in Borderlands 2, they are the main characters. The player characters are used to tell that story of Sanctuary and the Crimson Raiders. The players themselves are somewhat irrelevant to that story. Handsome Jack is one of the most iconic villains in video games, and the tone of the second game is such that you don't have to worry about confusing viewers with 2 very different worlds. The story really is basically the same between Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2. Evil megacorporations are trying to open the vault to get the alien technology. The players are different, but the major beats are more or less the same. And this would also allow you to use Tina and actually earn that emotional connection that was half-heartedly established with this movie. This also could have been broken into 2 movies very easily, Dune style if they wanted to. Doing it this way would have also allowed the introduction of another fan favorite character, Torg, who would fit the sillier tone of Borderlands 2 and future installments. My least popular option would have been the third choice, and that's if they insisted on crunching the 2 stories together. Just keep the 4 original Vault Hunters, keep the tone drier and darker, but continue to introduce Handsome Jack as the villain and go from there. Since 5 years separate Borderlands 1 from Borderlands 2, this could be tricky to do, but they could have pulled it off if they really wanted to. But no matter how they went story-wise, I think the movie should have been rated R and maintained some of the violence and gore and darkness from the games. My personal preference would have been the first option. Simply tell the Borderlands 1 story with a more serious tone. Aside from the story and casting, some other little things I would have liked to have seen in the movie. Any looting whatsoever. A single Borderlands chest being opened, please. Also, showing some of the more ridiculous weaponry could have been fun as well. I also would have liked to have seen the same kind of country western frontier tone that you experience in Borderlands 1, kind of the twangy, lonely music and things of that nature that they did away with completely in this movie. Number 8. The devil, as they say, is in the details. Here's how I know that someone at some point had a vision for this movie that was much closer and in line with the tone and story of the games. The details thrown into some of the scenes and set pieces are fantastic for fans. Moxie's bar looked great in Sanctuary. They took the time to use actual names of places from the game, even when it really didn't matter much, like Firestone and Pisswash Gully. In addition, the vehicles look, sound, and feel just like the vehicles in the game, which I loved. The creatures, from the Skags to the Rack and even the Destroyer and the Vault, all looked great. There were lots of other little details added in that fans may have noticed as well, like some of the signs posted around the landscape. Marcus's bus looked awesome, and even the Welcome to Pandora road sign. Perhaps my favorite of all, blocks of Splodio's cereal can be seen in Tannis's house. In addition, some of the guns looked, sounded, and felt just like the guns in the game, and when the character of Atlas powered up his shield, it was the exact same sound effect from your shield charging up in-game, which gave me a big smile. I did also like nods to the quests of the games by having Roland connect a broken power cable in the sewer scene to the elevator, which is something you do several times throughout the Borderlands games. Number 9, all that being said, look, I went into this movie expecting the worst. Hell, I was hoping for a so bad it's good experience, but it didn't end up being that at all. I wouldn't say I was pleasantly surprised, but I certainly disliked it far less than I thought I would. I ended up mostly entertained, but ultimately frustrated and disappointed at what could have been. The potential was there. The decision-making and process this movie went through to get to theaters is really heartbreaking for fans, as it probably crushes the potential for a sequel. Is this a under 10% Rotten Tomatoes score bad movie? No, it's really not, but it's not a good or particularly memorable movie either. I'm not angry that I saw it, but I do know that they really botched it, and it prevents what could have been an excellent movie franchise from one of my favorite gaming franchises. What the Borderlands movie really represents is the problems that come with the desire to be everything to everyone for mass appeal and having that trump the source material. When the number one goal is simply trying to make money and every decision is tied to that, you're going to sacrifice quality and faithfulness to the source material. By choosing cast on name recognition alone, by trying to tie the movie into a video game release, by changing the rating and tone of the source material to something theoretically with more mass appeal, all of these things just take away from letting the story speak for itself, letting a fan base form organically and making money the old-fashioned way. I know it sounds crazy. Make a good movie and let it find an audience. If it's good enough, it will draw in other fans and dollars. It's probably too late for Borderlands, unfortunately, but hopefully someone somewhere will eventually learn this lesson. Just tell the story people already know and like. Borderlands had a built-in audience. All you had to do was not screw it up, and they failed miserably at that. Just remember, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.